Hi everyone, and welcome to the channel, and I'm here for an album review for you guys. Now for this review, I'll be reviewing an album by the legendary rock band Asia. Now Asia, if you didn't know, is a supergroup that contains members of progressive rock bands. Now, you would think that Asia would be a very progressive sounding band since this is the case, right? Well, not necessarily. Asia, I do think, is a very accessible, mainstream sounding band. Now, I do think that Asia definitely has some, prog to them for sure, but I don't know if I would really consider Asia to be a full-on progressive rock band, since they are a bit mainstream for, to be a progressive rock band, I would say. And it is very interesting because these are guys that are more experienced with making more proggy music, music that is a little more complex than this. So it's almost like these guys decided that, they would come out with something that would be a little more accessible, more mainstream, and, these guys got together and, wanted to do this project. And I do think that Asia is a very underrated band for sure. Definitely not a band that gets the credit that they deserve, in my opinion. Now, I will admit that they're not as good as the individual bands, that these members are from, but I do think Asia is a very solid band for sure. And I know that there's some people that even say that this was the only good album that Asia ever came out with, which I disagree with highly, because I think Asia's discography is pretty strong for the most part. So the album that we'll be talking about in this video is Asia and their debut album. The album that started it all for Asia, of course, came out in the early 80s. And I do think that this is probably their best album. I will say that. And I know there's some people that would agree with that as well. This album just has some of their best songs, and it obviously does have some of their most accessible tracks. And maybe that's one of the reasons why Asia didn't, get that big, I guess, because they're too accessible and mainstream sounding, they kind of follow in the same lines as, a lot of the 80s rock cheesiness with the poppiness and all that. But is that really inherently a bad thing, though? That's really my thing with that, I guess. I think it can work to some degree, I think. I mean, there's some cases where I think it doesn't work, but I think the way Asia does it, I think they do a really good job. And if you're looking to check out Asia, I think that this would be a very good gateway. Of course, it is the start to their discography, so I think that this would be a very good album to start off with. And if you're into the 80s eras of Genesis and Yes, I think that you would dig this album. I think you would enjoy Asia. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these tracks. Of course, we got Heat of the Moment, which is one of their biggest songs, if not their biggest song. Maybe one of their best songs as well, I'm not sure. It is, of course, a highlight on the album. Very good opening track. It's catchy, radio-friendly, and very easy to listen to. And it's, of course, very accessible. And if you're looking to check out Asia, this would be a very good gateway song to check out. Not very complex, but it's, of course, still enjoyable to listen to. And then you got other songs like Time, Only Time Will Tell, which I believe is another fan favorite from this album. Not one of my favorites on the album, but I still think it's very strong, though. Not as memorable for me as Heat of the Moment, but still very good. And then you got songs like Wildest Dreams, which is also catchy. Also a song that's very accessible and very easy to get into. Now, I like this song a lot. It's probably another one of my favorites on the album. I just am really intrigued by the instrumentation. I think it's got some interesting things going on, and I don't know. I think it's a really good song. And you also got some very underrated songs on this album. Now, what's interesting to me is I feel like some of the deep cuts from this album are actually maybe somewhat better than, some of the more fan favorites on the album. Like the song Without You, for example, is, I think, a highlight on the album. Another highlight. Kind of an underrated track, I think. I'm just really intrigued by the melodies and the song structure, and it's a more dramatic sounding song, I believe. And yeah, I think it's a really well-made song, and of course Cutting It Fine I think is also kind of underrated, also very good. Here Comes the Feeling, the closing track, also very accessible and mainstream sounding, and it's a really good way to end things off with this album. And that's kind of what you get with this album. You get a lot of very accessible, mainstream sounding songs on this album. So there's not really much to say, but I mean, if you're into that kind of thing, then you would probably enjoy this album. If you're into the, I guess, the cheesiness of the 80s pop rock sound, I guess, you would enjoy this album if you do enjoy that kind of stuff. If you haven't heard this album yet, of course. But yeah, even in saying that, I think it's a strong album. So yeah, even the songs that I don't return to much from this album, I still think are pretty solid for the most part. So if I were to give this album a score, I'd probably give it a 9 out of 10. I think it's a great album, so if you haven't checked it out, do yourself a favor and check it out. Again, I think it's a good gateway album. If you're looking to check out Asia, this would be a very good start. So that's my review for Asia, the debut album. I think it's a great album, so that's my review. Let me know what you guys think. Have you heard this album? What do you think of this album? Are you a fan of Asia? Feel free to let me know. So on that note, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.